I never thought I'd say this, but my life was perfectly fine until I moved into Oak Ridge Heights. The neighborhood seemed like a dream come true. Beautiful homes, well-maintained landscaping, and a community pool that looked straight out of a resort brochure. What the real estate agent conveniently failed to mention was that our Homeowners Association president, Barbara Wellington, ruled this suburban paradise with an iron fist and a permanent scowl. Most people called her Barbara, but to those of us who'd been on the receiving end of her special brand of neighborly tyranny, she was simply Karen. I'd managed to stay off her radar for the first 3 months after moving in, but my peaceful existence came to an abrupt end when I decided to install a new gas grill on my back patio. "Excuse me," a shrill voice called out one Saturday morning as I was directing the installation crew. I turned to see Barbara marching across my lawn, her designer sunglasses perched on her head and a thick binder clutched to her chest like a shield. "Do you have HOA approval for this installation?" I forced a smile. "Good morning, Barbara. Yes, I submitted the paperwork last month and received approval. I have the email right here on my phone if you'd like to see it." Her lips pursed as if she'd just bitten into a lemon. "Well, the approval was for a grill, not for modification of gas lines. That requires separate paperwork and board approval." The installation technician glanced at me with a look that screamed, "Is this lady for real?" I maintained my composure and explained, "The approval covered the entire installation, including the gas line extension. It's all up to code, and being done by licensed professionals." Barbara's eyes narrowed as she flipped through her binder with frightening efficiency. Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that any modification to utility lines requires separate approval with detailed diagrams submitted no less than 60 days before work commences. I could feel my blood pressure rising but kept my voice level. "Barbara, with all due respect, the gas line extension is within my property boundaries and doesn't affect any common areas. The installation company has all the proper permits from the city." "City permits don't override HOA regulations," she snapped, slamming her binder shut. "I'm issuing a stop work order effective immediately. Continue and you'll be fined $500 per day of violation." The technician looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we're almost finished with the connection. Stopping now would actually create a safety hazard." Barbara turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then I suggest you work quickly to undo what you've done and secure the existing line properly. Not my problem." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving a trail of self-righteousness in her wake. I apologized to the technicians and asked them to secure everything properly so we could pause the installation. Better to fight this battle the right way than give Barbara ammunition against me. Little did I know, this was just the opening salvo in what would become a suburban Cold War. The next day I went through the HOA bylaws with a fine-toothed comb. Barbara had cited the rules correctly, but there was an exception clause for installations that followed specific safety protocols and used HOA-approved contractors. My installation company happened to be on that list, which meant Barbara's stop work order had no actual grounds. Armed with this information, I filed a formal appeal with the HOA board and requested an emergency meeting due to the safety concerns of leaving the project half-finished. To my surprise, the board's secretary, Tom, called me that evening. "Listen," he said in a hushed tone, "Barbara's on a power trip lately. Between us, several board members are tired of her interpreting the rules however she wants. We've scheduled your appeal for tomorrow evening, and I suggest you come prepared with all your documentation." I thanked Tom and spent the night organizing my paperwork. The next evening, I arrived at the community center 10 minutes early for the meeting, only to find Barbara already there, surrounded by stacks of folders and looking smugly confident. As other board members filtered in, Barbara made a show of checking her watch and sighing dramatically. When the meeting finally began, she immediately took control. "We're here to address a violation of HOA policy regarding unauthorized modification of utility lines at 437 Oak Ridge Drive," she announced, not even looking in my direction. "I've prepared a detailed report of the violations and recommended penalties." The board president, a mild-mannered man named Gerald, cleared his throat. Actually, Barbara, this is an appeal hearing. We should first allow the homeowner to present their case. Barbara's face flushed, but she nodded curtly and sat back in her chair. I stood and calmly presented my documentation, the original approval email, the exception clause in the bylaws, the contractor's certification as an HOA-approved vendor, and finally a safety report indicating the potential hazards of leaving the installation unfinished. Furthermore, I concluded, I've spoken with the city inspector who confirmed that interrupting this installation creates a greater safety risk than completing it properly. I have his assessment here in writing. The board members exchanged glances, and Gerald nodded thoughtfully. This seems quite thorough. Barbara, would you like to respond? Barbara practically leapt from her seat. Certainly. While the homeowner's documentation appears in order, what they've conveniently omitted is that the specific model of gas line extension they're using isn't on our approved list. Section 12, paragraph 7, specifies that all gas line components must be from our pre-approved catalog of parts. My jaw nearly dropped. This woman was inventing rules on the spot. I'd read every page of that absurd binder, and there was no catalog of approved parts anywhere in it. Gerald frowned. I don't recall that provision, Barbara. Can you show us where that's documented? For the first time, Barbara looked flustered. It's in the updated bylaws draft we discussed last month. The draft that hasn't been voted on or implemented yet? Tom asked innocently. The meeting room fell silent. Barbara's face reddened as she shuffled through her papers, desperately searching for something to support her claim. Finding nothing, she switched tactics. Regardless, as HOA president, I have emergency authority to halt any installation I deem potentially hazardous to the community. I exercised that authority in this case. Gerald sighed. Barbara, that authority is for genuine emergencies, not for enforcing personal interpretations of bylaws. Based on the documentation provided, I see no reason to uphold your stop work order. Does the board agree? One by one, each board member voted to overturn Barbara's order. As the final vote was cast, Barbara's expression hardened into stone. She gathered her papers with jerky movements and left without another word. I thanked the board and headed home, relieved but also wary. Something told me this victory would come with consequences. Sure enough, the next morning I woke to find a notice taped to my front door, listing 12 alleged violations of HOA rules, from improper mailbox height to unapproved shade of window trim. Each violation carried a $100 fine. It seemed Barbara had conducted a midnight inspection of my property with the specific goal of finding or inventing as many infractions as possible. I documented each alleged violation with photographs proving most were completely fabricated and submitted another appeal. This pattern continued for weeks. Barbara would issue citations, I would appeal and win, and she would find new alleged violations. It was exhausting, but I refused to give in to her bullying. The situation escalated when I finally completed my gas grill installation. The day after the work was finished, I invited some neighbors over for a barbecue. We were enjoying ourselves when Barbara appeared at my gate, camera in hand, taking pictures. "Excuse me," I called out, "may I ask what you're doing?" She smiled thinly. "Documenting the unauthorized gathering. HOA rules limit backyard events to 6 guests without prior approval." My neighbor Mike, who'd lived in the community for years, frowned. "That's not a rule, Barbara, never has been." "It's in the new addendum," she insisted, continuing to take pictures. "Which reminds me, your gas line installation appears to be improperly sealed. I'll need to report this to the safety board." That was when I noticed something odd. Barbara seemed to know details about my installation that wouldn't be visible from outside my property. "Have you been in my backyard when I wasn't home, Barbara?" She stiffened. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect common areas, which include the utility easements." "The gas line isn't in an easement," I said slowly. "It's entirely on my property, 15 feet from the property line. You would have had to trespass to see it." Barbara's face reddened. "I'm just doing my job, protecting this community." She turned and stalked away, but the damage was done. The seed of suspicion had been planted in my mind. The next day, I installed security cameras around my property, within HOA guidelines, of course. I didn't have to wait long for results. 2 days later, while I was at work, my phone alerted me to motion in my backyard. The camera footage showed Barbara in broad daylight examining my gas line connection. She appeared to be taking measurements and photos, clearly trespassing on my property. More disturbing was what she did next. She took a small tool from her pocket and began manipulating something near the gas line connection. I immediately called the gas company and asked them to send someone to check my line for tampering, then headed home as quickly as possible. When I arrived, the gas company technician was already inspecting the connection. His expression was grim. Someone definitely tampered with this valve. They loosened it just enough to create a slow leak. Not immediately dangerous, but over time it could have led to gas building up in your home. You're lucky you caught it. My blood ran cold. Would that have caused carbon monoxide to leak into my house? Potentially, yes, he confirmed. A faulty gas line can lead to incomplete combustion, which produces carbon monoxide, especially if the leak affected your furnace or water heater. It's odorless, colorless, and can be lethal. I showed him the security footage and he immediately reported it to his supervisor. This is criminal tampering with a gas line, he explained. It's extremely dangerous and absolutely illegal. We're required to report this to the police. Within hours, 2 police officers were at my door, reviewing the footage and taking my statement. They seemed particularly concerned when I explained the ongoing conflict with Barbara and her position of authority in the HOA. We take tampering with gas lines very seriously, one officer explained. It's not just property damage, it's potentially attempted homicide if someone were to get carbon monoxide poisoning as a result. The next day I was working in my home office when I heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, I saw Barbara being escorted from her house by police officers. Neighbors emerged from their homes, watching in shock as she was placed in a police car. Later that afternoon, Tom from the HOA board called to inform me that Barbara had been arrested for criminal tampering with a gas line, trespassing, and reckless endangerment. The district attorney was considering additional charges related to the potential for carbon monoxide poisoning. The board has called an emergency meeting, Tom explained. We voted unanimously to remove Barbara from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. We also want to formally apologize for your experience and assure you that this type of behavior is absolutely not what our community stands for. I appreciated Tom's call but was still processing the severity of what had happened. Barbara hadn't just been on a power trip. She had potentially put my life at risk because of a petty neighborhood dispute over a gas grill. 3 days later, I received official notice that Barbara had been released on bail but was facing multiple felony charges. Her tampering could have caused a gas leak leading to carbon monoxide poisoning, which elevated the charges to potential attempted manslaughter. She was looking at up to 15 years in prison if convicted on all counts. The following weekend, as I was finally enjoying my new grill, Gerald stopped by with an update. Thought you'd want to know. Barbara's been ordered to pay $20,000 in restitution for the gas line repairs and security measures, plus she's banned from coming within 500 feet of your property. She's also been removed from the HOA board permanently. He handed me an envelope. This is a formal apology from the board, along with confirmation that all those bogus violations have been expunged from your record. I thanked him and watched as he walked back down my driveway. As I turned to go inside, I caught a glimpse of Barbara across the street, packing boxes into her car. Our eyes met briefly and the look of utter defeat on her face as she realized she'd lost everything, her position, her reputation, and now, potentially, her freedom, over a gas grill installation was something I'll never forget.